Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this is our second annual APSIA Career Series for international students. We're so glad to have you joining us. I think we have the entire time zone covered. We're very excited today. We have Mark Rhoads joining us. He's been an incredible research resource for all of us throughout the APSIA network. Mark is an immigration attorney in the immigration practice group at the law firm of McCandlish and Holton. He works with companies and universities all over the U.S., helping employers process temporary visas and permanent resident green cards for international employees. He also speaks regularly to employer groups and university groups, including our APSIA team here, regarding immigration options for international students in the United States. Mark is listed in the best lawyers in America in immigration law, and we are grateful to have him as a resource for all of us. Just a couple of quick functions. We will be sharing questions at the end. So if John and I, my colleague John Collin from the Sanford School at Duke University, and I will be monitoring that chat. If you want to throw any questions that you have in there, and then we'll save some time at the end with Mark. So thank you, Mark.
All right, let me take it away. So my name's Mark Rhoads. I am an immigration attorney. What that means is that I work with companies, I also work with a lot of universities all over the United States, helping them process work visas and permanent resident green cards for international employees. My office is actually based in Richmond, Virginia, about 2 hours south of Washington, D.C. And although my office is based in Richmond, we have 10 immigration attorneys, and we process thousands of work visas and permanent resident green cards for companies and employers all over the United States. So we work coast to coast. And I've been practicing immigration law for about 30 years. And I can tell you that when you are out looking for a job after graduation, most employers in the US will have no idea how the immigration process works. They don't understand how you move from being an F1 student to getting a work visa and staying in the United States after graduation. So what I'm going to focus on here today is I'm going to give you a roadmap, because as I said, I've been practicing this in this area for about 30 years. And I can tell you that there's a very clear path that about 99% of every international student will follow to stay and work in the United States after graduation. So I'm going to kind of give you that little roadmap here in just a minute. I know that after this recent election, there's a lot of uncertainty about where immigration law is going to go. What kinds of visas are going to be available? Are they going to expand the H-1B program, et cetera, et cetera? Right now, nobody has any answers. So what I'm going to do here this afternoon is to give you the lay of the land for how things work currently, so that if there are changes in the future, you will have a baseline to understand what those changes mean and how they may affect you in your job search. And I can tell you, I'm going to be throwing a lot of information at you here in the next 45 minutes or so. So I think some of the most important information is up on the screen right now, which is my contact information and contact information from one of my law partners, Helen Conrad. And that's important information because we'll answer questions for free. So if you walk out of this presentation and you forget everything that you heard here this afternoon and you have questions, or if you have questions that just don't get answered today, feel free to send me an email, give me a call, and I'm happy to answer your questions. If you are out talking to an employer and the employer has questions about how the process works, tell them to send me an email, give me a call, and I'm happy to answer their questions as well. And I can tell you that we field hundreds and hundreds of questions every year from international students or from employers who are recruiting international students. So it's a great free resource. I encourage you to hold on to this information. So let's jump right into how this whole process works. So to be an international student in the United States, you can be in any number of visa categories. There are temporary visa categories that run from the letter A all the way down to the letter V, as in Victor. Every letter of the alphabet has some visa category associated with it. Most international students are here in the United States in a visa category called F1, F like Frank. And because the vast majority of students are in F1 status, that's going to be the focus of my comments this afternoon. If you are in another visa category, such as, say, a dependent of an H-1B, you're an H-4, or a dependent of somebody in L status, you're an L-2, or a J-1. If you're in any of these other visa categories, I'm happy to answer your questions by phone or by email, but the focus of today is going to be F1. So if you are an F1 student in the United States, F1 is for students who are studying in an academic degree program, which is going to be most of the folks on this Zoom. If you are in F1 status, there are two types of work that you need to focus on. What types of work can you do during your degree program? In other words, before you graduate. And what kinds of work can you do after you graduate? I want to run really quickly through some of the options that are available for international students during their degree program, in other words, pre-graduation. Then we'll turn to the options available after graduation. So pre-graduation work, F1 students, the fundamental issue with an F1 student is you're supposed to be here in the United States to study. You're not supposed to be here to work. There are limited exceptions that allow F1 students to work. One exception is that you can work on campus. You can work in any job on your college campus as long as you are working for a university employer. What I mean by that is you can't open up your own online business from your dorm room and say that that's on-campus employment, because it's not for a university employer. So you can work for the bookstore, you can work for the campus cafeteria, you can work as a researcher for a professor. You can do all kinds of work on campus for a university employer. So that's exception number one. If you're an F1 student, you can also work off campus, but only in very limited circumstances. One circumstance that allows you to work off campus is called curricular practical training, CPT. Curricular practical training is for F1 students who are in a degree program that has a work component that is an integral part of the program. So for example, student teaching, if you're in an education program, they require you to work off campus to get in a school setting to get experience. You use CPT to engage in that off-campus work. If you are in a degree program that has a work component that's part of the program, then you can get authorized to work just through your university foreign student advisor. You don't have to apply to the Immigration Service. The school will actually authorize you to be able to work off campus using curricular practical training. Another option available to international students to work off campus is called optional practical training, OPT. Every international student in the United States in F1 status gets an initial authorization of 12 months of optional practical training that they can use either during the degree program, or you can save that 12 months of OPT and use it after you graduate to work for an employer for 12 months after graduation. If you use OPT during your degree program, so let's say you're in a degree program that does not have a work component, so you don't have CPT available to you, the only way you could work off campus would be to use optional practical training. Any amount of optional practical training that you use during your degree program is subtracted from the amount of OPT you have available after you graduate. So many international students will try to hold on to their optional practical training until after graduation, so you have that full 12 months of work authorization after you graduate. But if you don't have CPT available to you, the only option that you're going to have is going to be to use optional practical training. To get optional practical training, you have to apply to the Immigration Service to get a work card, and it can take many months to get that card. So if you're going to use OPT for a summer internship, you need to plan ahead and coordinate with your foreign student advisor at your school to make sure you get that OPT work card in your hand so that you can go to work. Other than CPT and OPT, another way to work off campus is based on economic hardship. If after you enter the United States and start school in F1 status, if something unforeseen happens, your country devolves into civil war, or you have a terrible economic calamity, and all of a sudden you don't have the resources available to fund your education that you had when you entered, you can apply to the Immigration Service and ask for off-campus work authorization based on a severe economic hardship. Hopefully that will never happen to you, but that is an option that is available. There are certain designated international organizations that F1 students can work for as interns. You need to coordinate with your foreign student advisor again at your university. If you go to work for a designated international organization, such as the United Nations, International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, these organizations can hire F1 students as interns on a part-time basis. You still need to get authorization from the Immigration Service, but it is an option that's available that doesn't require you to use OPT or CPT. And I often get questions from students saying, well, look, I don't want to use OPT. I want to keep it all till after I graduate. I don't have CPT as an option. I don't have a work component as part of my program. Why can't I just go volunteer? Just go to work off campus because I want the experience. I don't care if I get paid. I'm happy to go volunteer. And the answer to that is almost never an option. The issue about whether an F1 student is working without authorization is not dependent on whether you get paid. It is dependent on whether you are providing a productive service for an organization. And if you are providing a productive service that benefits the organization, then you are likely going to be determined to be out of status as working without authorization. So you are always better off not volunteering and instead relying either on curricular practical training or optional practical training to work off campus. So those are the options that are available to F1 students during a degree program. Let's turn our attention now to the path that you will follow once you graduate. So you're in your last semester of your degree program. You start thinking about working after graduation. What are the options that are going to be available to you to allow you to stay and work after you graduate? Well, what I have up here on the screen right now is the path that I've seen in my career that about 95 or higher % of every international student follows to stay and work in the United States. And the path is like this. You are F1. You will initially get optional practical training after you graduate. Every F1 student gets 12 months of OPT, unless you've used it during your degree program. But if you have not used it during the program, you will have 12 months of OPT available after you graduate. If you are in a STEM degree program, science, technology, engineering, or math, you'll get an additional 24 months of optional practical training for a total of 36. My understanding is that most of the folks in this audience are not in STEM degree programs, so we're going to focus on the initial 12 months. In your last semester of your degree program, you will file to get that optional practical training work card. Once you get that card in hand, you can go to work for any employer in the United States, doing any job, anywhere in the country, as long as the job is related to your degree program. And OPT is a great way to get your foot in the door with an employer because the employer doesn't have to do anything. You get this work card that allows you to work for up to 12 months as long as the job is related to your degree program. The employer doesn't have to file paperwork with the government. The employer doesn't have to pay any fees or costs. That employer can put you to work doing any job related to your degree as long as you have this optional practical training work card in your hand. And I'm going to talk in a second about how to get that card. While you are working, using your optional practical training. In other words, you graduate, you have your optional practical training work card, you go to work for an employer. While you're working, you're going to want to talk to the employer about sponsoring you for an H-1B. H-1B is the most common work visa in the United States. It will allow you to stay and work in the US for an additional 6 years after your optional practical training. So initially you get OPT, then you're going to move on to get your H-1B, allowing up to 6 years of work eligibility. And it's typically during that 6 years of H-1B employment that most students pursue a permanent resident green card if it is your desire to stay and live in the United States longer than the H-1B allows. And let me just take a second to talk about permanent resident green cards, because I get questions about green card from students all the time. So what is a green card? A green card means that once you get this card, and it looks just like a little driver's license, it's kind of a minty green color. Once you get a green card, it means that you can stay and live and work in the United States for the rest of your life. It also allows you to travel freely in and out of the United States. You never have to go back and get a visa ever again. You travel using your green card and your passport. So getting a green card has great advantages because you can work for any employer doing any job. You don't have to work at all if you don't want to. You can open up your own business. It gives you great flexibility in terms of your employment in the United States. It also gives you great flexibility in terms of travel in and out of the United States. The problem with a green card, though, is that there are only very few ways to get one, and it takes a very long time. One way to get a permanent resident green card is through certain family members, family-based permanent residents. If you have a family member in the US and that family member is either a permanent resident, they have their own green card, or they are a US citizen, that family member may be able to sponsor you to get a green card. Not all family members count. The only ones who can sponsor you to get a green card are what they call immediate relatives, parents, spouses, kids, and in some cases, brothers and sisters. So if you have a parent, spouse, child, or brother or sister who is either a US citizen or a permanent resident, that person may be able to sponsor you to get a permanent resident green card. I'm not going to spend time on family-based permanent residence. If you have questions about it, send me an email, give me a call. I'm happy to answer your questions. The other way to get a permanent resident green card is through employment. That is, if you have an employer who is willing to sponsor you for a permanent resident green card, the employer has to go through a very lengthy process. It's called PERM labor certification. And the employment-based green card process can actually take 2 to 3 years or longer. If you are from China or India, it could actually be 5, 6, 7 years or longer to get a permanent resident green card based on employment. But here's the key thing about employment-based permanent residence, and that is you first have to have an employer. I have never known an employer to sponsor someone for a green card before you go to work for that employer. So when you're thinking about jobs and working after graduation, don't focus on green cards. What you need to focus on are the temporary visa options that allow you to go to work for an employer. Once you're working for the employer, then you can start talking about getting a permanent resident green card. And the typical temporary work visa options that are available are F1 optional practical training, and then the H-1B. And because those are so critical, let's jump into the details of the F1 OPT and then a little bit about the H-1B. So optional practical training is always your first step to staying and working in the United States after graduation. You need to get a work card in order to take advantage of OPT. In other words, every F1 student gets up to 12 months of OPT to work in the United States after graduation. But in order to take advantage of that OPT, you've got to get a card. It's called an employment authorization document, your EAD. And you'll hear and you'll read on the internet about people applying for their EAD. That just means the little work card that looks like a driver's license that will allow you to stay and work and take advantage of your optional practical training. You cannot go to work until you have that card. If you go to work before you have the card in hand, then you are working without authorization and you are deportable from the United States. If an employer puts you to work before you have the card, that employer is employing an unauthorized alien. They are subject to fines and penalties from the federal government. No employer wants to take that risk. So the rules for applying for this OPT work card are very important, and I encourage you to work with your university foreign student office to make sure that you understand the rules for applying for this optional practical training work card, your employment authorization document. Most universities have workshops that they give on how to apply for OPT, and I encourage you to attend those workshops, because if you miss any of the deadlines for applying for OPT, you will lose your ability to stay and work in the United States after graduation. It is very, very imperative that you apply for and get this work card. Apply during your last semester to make sure the card is in your hand by the time you graduate. Let me tell you a couple of rules about applying for the card. There is a window during which you can apply, and the window is 90 days before completion of your program, which typically is graduation day, or up to 60 days after completion of your program. So that's the window to apply. What I suggest is go back, find your graduation date, circle it on a calendar, count back 90 days. That's the first day you can apply. There is no reason to delay. You may as well apply as soon as you can because you need that card in your hand in order to go to work. And right now it's taken the Immigration Service 90 to 120 days, sometimes longer than that, to process this work card. So it's important to apply as early as you can, work with your foreign student advisor, submit your application so that that card is in your hand as soon after graduation as possible. Once you get the card, then you are eligible for employment in the United States, and you can work for any employer anywhere in the US doing any job related to your degree program. I'm going to skip over the STEM. If people have questions about STEM, we can come back to that. But then while you're working, using your optional practical training. So again, you get that card in your hand, you're able to go to work for any employer. Once you start working, you know that there is a clock ticking. And the clock is that 12-month clock on your OPT work card. And at the end of that 12 months of optional practical training, you will have two options. One is either to hop a plane and depart the United States. You can stay in the US for up to 60 days after your OPT expires, but you can't work during that time frame. Just get your things together and leave. Or the other option is find a longer term work visa that will allow you to stay and work after your OPT expires. And the most common work visa to allow people to stay and work after OPT is called the H-1B. So let's talk about some of the rules for H-1B. There are basically three requirements for an international student to get an H-1B work visa in the United States. Requirement number one, you must have an employer. Only an employer can file an H-1B petition. Now think back to the discussion about optional practical training. You didn't have to have an employer. You can apply for that OPT work card once you're within 90 days of graduation. You don't even have to have a job offer yet. You're automatically eligible to apply for the OPT on your own. H-1B is very different. You must have an employer in order to file for an H-1B. So requirement number one, got to have an employer. Requirement number two, you must have at least a 4-year bachelor's degree. That bachelor's degree can be either from the United States or it can be from outside the United States as long as the foreign degree is the equivalent of a US bachelor's degree. So if you are currently in a bachelor's degree program and you don't have a prior degree, you don't yet qualify for an H-1B. You have to have a degree in order to do that. If you are in an advanced degree program, master's, PhD, whatever, you already meet this requirement because you will already have an undergraduate degree as long as that degree is the equivalent of a US bachelor's degree. So first requirement, got to have an employer. Second requirement, you have to have at least a US bachelor's degree or the foreign equivalent. Requirement number three, the degree must relate closely to the job. In other words, the job has to require the type of degree that you have as a minimum entry-level requirement for this job. So what does that mean? So, the H-1B is what they call a specialty occupation visa, which means that it has to be a job that requires a specialty degree in order to do the job. Like an accountant requires an accounting degree, or a civil engineer requires a civil engineering degree. When you are out looking for work, it's important that you focus on job opportunities that are very closely related to your degree program. This is the most common, this last requirement is the most common reason that the Immigration Service denies H-1B applications. They get an H-1B application in, they look at the job description, they look at your degree, and they say there is a disconnect between the degree that you have and the job opportunity that's being offered to you. So what I tell students all the time, and as I said, we process hundreds of thousands of H-1Bs out of this office. I would guess that in the time that I've been practicing immigration law, we've probably processed 50,000 H-1B applications. And we have a very, very low denial rate. I mean, I can't think of maybe one hand worth of denials that I've had over the years. Because one of the things that we require employers to do and we require international students to do is that when you get a job opportunity, get a listing of the job duties. And then you go to your degree transcript and you tell me the coursework that you took that trains you to do these job duties. And if you can make a close correlation between the coursework that you took and the duties of the position, you're going to have a strong H-1B petition. If you cannot make a close correlation between your coursework and the duties of the position, then you might want to start looking for a different job that is more closely related to your degree, because the Immigration Service reviews this requirement very, very carefully. So again, 3 requirements for H-1B. You have to have an employer, you have to have at least a bachelor's degree or the foreign equivalent, and the degree must relate closely to the duties of the position. So let's say you've paid attention, you get your optional practical training work card, you go to work for an employer, you're working using your 12 months of OPT, and you go to the employer and you say, look, let's file an H-1B petition. Employer files the petition, and I'm going to get into how that works in just a second. They file a petition listing the job duties, listing the coursework that you took, showing how the job requires the kind of degree that you have, and the Immigration Service approves the case. It takes about 5 months right now for the Immigration Service to review an H-1B petition. You can ask for expedited processing, but that's for conversation for a different day. But let's assume they get the case and they approve it. What does that get you? Well, initially, it gets you 3 years of work authorization in H-1B status. Once you are within 6 months of the expiration of that first 3 years, you can apply for a 3-year extension for a total of 6 years in H-1B status. One of the requirements for H-1B is that when an employer sponsors you for H-1B, you can only work for that employer. You cannot work in any other capacity. You can only work in the job described in the H-1B petition. So does that mean that you're stuck with the same employer for all 6 years of H-1B? No. You can actually change to a new H-1B employer. But every time you change jobs, the new employer will have to file a new H-1B petition for you. So you are permitted to change employers, but each time you do, the new employer has to file a new H-1B petition. Well, why is that? I already have an H-1B. Well, the reason is because the Immigration Service wants to make sure that the new job requires the type of degree that you have. It may be that the first job that you got in H-1B status required your type of degree as a minimum entry level requirement, but maybe the next job doesn't. Maybe it's unrelated to your degree. So each time you change jobs, the Immigration Service wants to see a new H-1B petition. But if you change jobs, that doesn't give you a new 6 years of H-1B. You get 6 years total. So let's say you go to work after graduation and you get an H-1B with employer A. Employer A gets a 3-year approval. 1 year in, you decide you hate employer A. You want to go to employer B. Employer B files an H-1B petition. That employer will ask for 3 years. So you'll have 1 year with employer A, 3 years with employer B. That's 4 years total. You'll only have 2 years of H-1B remaining. So it's 6 years of H-1B eligibility, no matter how many employers you jump around to. So when I do a lot of these kinds of presentations to employer groups, and one of the first questions that they ask, and I'll tell them H-1B, got to have an employer, got to have a degree has to relate to the job, et cetera. The first question that they ask me is, okay, well, how much is this going to cost? What is it going to cost to do an H-1B, and who has to pay the cost of the H-1B? Well, the H-1B has 2 categories of cost associated with it. The first category of cost is an attorney fee, my fee. Most organizations do not have in-house expertise to process H-1Bs. Some do, but not many. So most of the time, employers will hire an outside attorney like me or some other immigration attorney. So the first category of cost is an attorney fee. In my office, we charge $3,100 to process an H-1B petition. Different attorneys charge different amounts, but in our office, $3,100. The second category of cost is the government filing fee, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services filing fee. And the filing fee has a number of different components to it. And by the time you add up the entire H-1B filing fee, it boils down to this. If you go to work for a private company, there are different fees associated with nonprofits, but if you go to work for a private employer with more than 25 employees, the total filing fee is $3,380. So my fee, $3,100. The government filing fee is $3,380. If you go to work for an employer that has 25 or fewer employees, the government filing fee is $2,010. So my fee, $3,100. The government filing fee, $2,010. So those are the costs of the H-1B program. And I can tell you that from experience, the fees and the costs of the H-1B are not necessarily a deterrent for the vast majority of employers. Most employers are more than happy to, they're not happy, but they're more than willing to spend this amount of money to get qualified H-1B workers. So don't be intimidated by the fees and the costs of the H-1B program. It's important that you understand what those fees and costs are, because many employers have a very different idea about how much it costs to do an H-1B. I've heard employers tell me that, if it's $10,000 to do an H-1B or $15,000 to do an H-1B. Maybe I'm not charging enough, but I can tell you that that is not the typical fee or the cost for an H-1B. And it's very important for you to be able to understand that. And if you have an employer who has questions about it, I'm happy to answer their questions. So if the cost is not really an issue for the H-1B, what is the issue for most employers? Well, here's the issue. And the issue is that there is a quota on the number of H-1Bs that can be issued every year. And that quota is 85,000. So even though the H-1B is the most common and the most popular work visa in the United States, this quota is a major problem. So the quota is 85,000 new H-1Bs that can be issued every year. The H-1B quota year runs from October 1 to September 30 every single year. So the quota year that we are in right now started October 1 of 2024, and it will end September 30 of 2025. During that quota year, the government has 85,000 new H-1Bs that it can issue. And when I emphasize new, it's because once you get an H-1B, you never have to worry about the quota ever again. You only have to worry about the H-1B quota the first time you get an H-1B. So if you get an H-1B in the quota year, you can change and move to a new employer. You don't have to worry about the quota. You can file an H-1B anytime. If you need to extend your H-1B for the second 3 years, you don't have to worry about the quota. You can file that extension without regard to the quota. You only need to worry about the quota the very first time you get an H-1B. So on October 1 of every year, 85,000 H-1Bs become available. That quota is divided into two different buckets. There is a bucket of 20,000 H-1Bs available to individuals who have a U.S. advanced degree. That is an advanced degree, anything above a bachelor's degree, master's, PhD, JD for a lawyer, MD for a doctor, any degree above a bachelor's degree from a United States college or university qualifies for what they call the advanced degree quota. And that is 20,000 H-1Bs available just to individuals with a U.S. advanced degree. The remainder of the quota, 65,000, is for every other degree, anybody else who has a degree from anywhere. So if you have a bachelor's degree from the United States, you're in the 65,000 quota. If you have a PhD from China, you're in the 65,000 quota because that's not a U.S. advanced degree. If you have a master's degree from Canada, you're in the 65,000 quota because it's not a U.S. advanced degree. Only individuals with an advanced degree from a United States college or university get into that 20,000 quota. Does it make any difference which quota you get into? And the answer is no. As long as you get a quota number You don't care whether you're in the 20,000 quota or the 65,000 quota, as long as you get a quota number. And I'm going to talk about how to get one of those quota numbers in a second. So the quota year that we're in started October 1 of 2024. It will end September 30 of 2025. Does anybody have any idea how many of the 85,000 H-1Bs are still available after October 1 of 2024? And the answer is 0. All of the H-1Bs have been taken, and in fact, all 85,000 were taken on October 1, the very first day that they became available. And the reason that they were all taken on the very first day is because employers can pre-file to try to get one of those quota numbers. And it's very important for you to understand how this pre-filing works so that you give yourself the best chance of getting an H-1B quota number. So let's look at how the pre-filing process works. So what I have up here on the screen right now is a graph of the quota year. So October 1, the shaded area starts October 1, and it runs through September 30. That's the quota year every single year. On October 1, 85,000 H-1Bs become available. But employers know, and now you know, that you can actually pre-register. You can pre-file to try to get a quota number. Every single year in March, the government opens up a pre-registration period to allow employers who want to sponsor for H-1B to register to get a quota number. We don't know yet when the registration period is going to take place in March of this year. So we have about a month until the registration period opens up. We don't know the dates yet because the government announces every year in February when the March registration period will take place. On this particular screen, I'm using the dates from this past registration period, which ran from March 6 to March 22. So during that registration period, any employer that wants to file an H-1B petition to try to get a quota number files a registration during the registration period. You don't need to file on the first day. You don't need to panic. You have that entire registration period to file your registration application. Once all the registration applications are in, so in this particular example on March 22, they close the registration and they take all the registrations that were filed. And this past year, there were over 500,000 registrations filed for the 85,000 quota. So there are far more registrations filed than they have quota numbers available. So what they do is they do a random lottery. They take all the registrations that were filed, they put them into a big pile. First thing they do is they take out all of the advanced degree registrations. So when you do the registration, you check a little box to say whether you have a U.S. advanced degree. If you have a U.S. advanced degree, you will be in the 20,000 advanced degree quota. So they take all of the cases that check the box saying it's a U.S. advanced degree case. And let's say out of that 500,000 registrations, let's say 100,000 were advanced degree cases. First thing they do is they take that 100,000 advanced degree, they count out 20,000 quota numbers. They then take the remaining 80,000, put it back in the big pile, mix it up all over again, and then they count out 65,000. So if you have a U.S. advanced degree, you actually get 2 chances in the lottery. You get a chance during the advanced degree quota, and you get a chance during the regular lottery quota. Once they have done both of those lottery selections, you will know by April 1 whether your case was selected. So this past year, the registration ran from March 6 to March 22. By April 1, they alerted everyone who was selected in that H-1B lottery process whether their case was selected. If your case was selected in the lottery, you then have 90 days to file an H-1B petition. You file the H-1B petition showing that you have a degree, that the degree relates to the job. Immigration Service will process that H-1B petition, and they will approve it as of October 1. So let's say that you graduate in May of 2025, okay? The lottery process is going to take place in March, even before you graduate. Can you enter the lottery before you graduate? The answer is yes. If you have an employer willing to sponsor you for H-1B, they can file a registration even before you have your degree. They can file the registration as long as you will have the degree by the time you file the H-1B petition. So let's say you're in school right now, you have an employer, the employer files a registration during the March registration period. You're alerted on April 1 that your case was selected. Can you file the H-1B petition now? No, you don't have your degree yet. You don't graduate until May. Once you get your degree in May, then you can file the H-1B petition. The H-1B petition will be approved and effective as of October 1. But how do you work between graduation in May and October 1 when the H-1B becomes effective? Well, the answer to that is OPT. So you have to get optional practical training in order to bridge you with employment authorization from the day you graduate in May until October 1 when the quota is released. Well, most individuals who are in F1 status don't have an employer willing to sponsor them before they graduate. For most F1 students, you graduate, you get your OPT, then you talk to the employer about the H-1B. So how does that process work? Well, let's say you graduate in May. You're graduating May 2025. When you graduate, you'll get your optional practical training work card. That optional practical training work card will allow you to work from May when you graduate up until May of the following year in the shaded area. So when you get your OPT work card, you'll work through the summer. You'll get up to October 1 when the quota is released. You don't care because you didn't have a application submitted anyway. You keep working. You get up to January 1. Guess what's looming on the horizon? The March registration the year after you graduate. That's when you are going to want to get your H-1B registration filed. So you graduate in May, you get your OPT work card, you work through the fall, you get to January, you go to your employer and you say, hey, employer, if you want me to continue to work after my OPT, we need to get a registration filed in the March registration period for an H-1B. So the employer contacts me or contacts a different attorney. If you file the H-1B registration, if your case is selected, you'll be alerted by April 1. You can file the H-1B petition at any time. If the H-1B petition is approved, it will be effective as of October 1. But guess what? Your OPT ran from May, the year you graduate, until May of the following year. If your H-1B is not effective until October 1, how do you work? Your OPT is expired. The H-1B is not effective until October 1. Well, the answer to that is Immigration Service has a rule. They call it cap gap relief. Sounds like an antacid. In many ways it is. What the cap gap relief rule says is that as long as you are selected for an H-1B in the lottery and you file your H-1B petition before your OPT expires, your OPT will automatically extend until October 1 when the quota is released, so you will have uninterrupted work authorization the entire time. So that is the nutshell of the H-1B quota. It's very frustrating, but it's very important for you to understand how that process works so that you can talk to employers about how the process works. There are certain organizations that are exempt from this quota. They can file H-1Bs at any time. If you go to work for one of the 4 types of organizations on the screen, they never have to worry about the quota. They still have to prove that your degree relates to the job, but they do not ever have to worry about a quota. They can file an H-1B at any time. First, universities. You go to work for a university, you can get an H-1B anytime, as long as you're working in a job that requires your kind of degree. Second category, nonprofit organizations affiliated with universities, like a university research facility or a university-related hospital. A third category, nonprofit research organizations. Not all nonprofits are exempt from the quota, just nonprofits that are engaged primarily in basic or applied research. And that can be international relations research, it can be social services research, it can be tax policy research. It doesn't have to be scientific research, as long as it's a nonprofit and is engaged primarily in basic or applied research. The last type of organization is a governmental research organization like the Los Alamos Lab out there in Albuquerque or the Jefferson National Lab in Newport News, Virginia. Those are the organizations that are exempt from the quota. Every other organization in this country is subject to that H-1B quota. So it's very important for you to understand how that works. It is a very frustrating part of these types of presentations when I have to give the bad news about how many registrations are filed and the fact that you have about a 20% chance of getting selected. But you have to register in order to give yourself the best chance possible. There are some alternatives to the H-1B that may be available to you. I'm going to buzz through these very quickly. If you are from one of the countries, if you're a citizen of one of the countries listed across the top of the screen, there are excellent options available other than the H-1B. Canada and Mexico have the TN. Chile and Singapore have what's called an H-1B1. Australia has what's called an E3. All of those are excellent options. Similar to the H-1B, quotas never run out. So if you're from one of those countries, there are excellent options. Next category is L1. This is for multinational managers or executives. Multinational, working for a multinational company that has operations outside the US and operations inside the US. You first have to go to work for the organization outside the United States for at least 1 year. Once you do that, you can transfer back in using an L1. No quota on L1, but obviously it's very limited because you have to work for a multinational. You have to work outside the US for at least a year. Another category is called E-visa for citizens of certain countries that have treaties of trade and commerce with the United States. You can actually Google E-visa treaty countries. If you are from one of those countries and you have questions about the E-visa, I'm more than happy to answer your questions. But with those exceptions, most students who are not selected in the lottery simply re-enroll in a degree program, go back and get themselves another degree, or they depart the United States, go back to their home country. So that is the unfortunate circumstance that we have with the H-1B quota. I get lots of questions from students saying, I heard that they're going to expand the H-1B quota. It hasn't been expanded for a very long time. I do not anticipate that that will happen anytime soon. So I think it's very important for everybody to understand how this quota works, how you get the pre-registration, and most importantly, as an international student, plan ahead. While you're in the last semester of your degree program, plan ahead to get your optional practical training. While you're using OPT, plan ahead to make sure you get that registration for the H-1B during the H-1B registration process. And then if you're fortunate enough to get selected in the lottery and you get your H-1B approved, then you can start planning ahead for permanent resident green card. And with that, I'll turn it over to questions.
Great. I think we have quite a few, so I'll just run through those. Our first question, Mark, is can students leave the country while CPT is being processed?
What I recommend usually for any pre-graduation issue like CPT or pre-graduation OPT, work with your foreign student advisor. They are the ones who are the most knowledgeable about travel while you are in F1. But the short answer is yes, you can travel while CPT is being processed. But again, talk with your foreign student advisor. They're the ones that have the knowledge on these issues.
Our second question in the chat is if I want to volunteer during the second year of my degree, I'm assuming this is our master's student in their final year, can I apply for OPT for that? This particular student hopes to have a green card when they finish their degree. They're married to a US citizen.
Yeah, if you're married to a US citizen, there is no reason to delay filing for the green card. You should pursue that right away. You'll get yourself an interim work card that will allow you to work for any employer doing any job. So many for reasons unknown to me, F1 students often try to cling to their F1 status even after they've married a US citizen. And the answer is apply for the green card. Don't wait. But yes, you can, working as a volunteer without OPT or CPT is always risky. If you want to go to work as a volunteer, always better to try to get CPT or OPT in order to take advantage of that. But if you're married to a US citizen, apply for the green card, get that interim work card and use that.
Great. I think you covered this question pretty well, but the window or the deadline by which the employer must file the H-1B petition, I think that question was posted before you had that timeline.
Right.
Please feel free if you have additional questions to let us know about that. Second question, I feel like you also addressed this one. Please speak to the H-1B opportunities for academic employers, which are exempt from the quota. I think we covered that really well.
They can
They were
find
way
that out.
ahead of you. They were way ahead of you on the questions. Are there any other conditions to the type of job one needs to secure OPT? For example, the salary level or the number of hours that are required.
There are for OPT after graduation, you have to work at least 20 hours, but there is no minimum salary requirement other than the federal minimum wage. They can pay anything they want above federal minimum wage. No requirement for particular salary. There is for H-1B, but not for OPT.
Perfect. Does it make sense to select employers based on whether they have sponsored visas in the past? How does one know where these institutions are?
The vast majority of H-1Bs are filed by organizations that have never done an H-1B ever before. And I can tell you that from my experience, the largest employers that do lots of H-1Bs, you know, if you want to look those up, fine. My typical advice and what has worked for students over the years is find an opportunity that works for you and for your degree. If the employer is unfamiliar with the H-1B process, have them give me a call, send me an email. Usually in about 5 minutes, I can walk them through how this process works. And I have helped thousands of international students get jobs with employers who had never done an H-1B ever before.
That's awesome. We're so grateful for you as a resource, Mark. I think we also answered this question, but I'll go ahead. When should we start applying for the OPT if we don't have a position or a job offer? What date to give as a start date when applying for OPT? We work with students on this question all the time.
Yeah, you can apply anytime within 90 days of graduation. You don't have to have a job offer. You don't have to have started looking for a job yet. You're automatically able to apply for that OPT during that 90-day window. And the start date, that's always a difficult issue. I would encourage you to work with your foreign student advisor. If you have a job offer already in hand, obviously make the card effective very shortly after graduation. If you don't have a job offer, you can make that card effective anytime within the 60-day period after graduation. And you're going to have to just take a guess as to when you want it to be effective. You can't go to work until the card is effective. So if you make it effective way off into the distance, you may have a job opportunity you'll lose because the card's not, you're not eligible to work until the effective date on the card. Hard issue.
Yeah, difficult question. Does the job description for OPT have to be related to your degree program or just the duties?
Well, the job duties are what matter. They have to be related to your degree program, yes.
Right. What defines a volunteer? If I work in my house on my computer and write emails to people and nobody pays me, is that a volunteer?
Well, are you doing it on behalf of an organization? Then yes, I mean, that's volunteer work. If it's work that they would otherwise pay somebody to do, then that's going to be unauthorized employment. The fact that you're doing it for free doesn't mean that it's not employment.
Can we leave and come back to the United States after graduation before you have a job offer or started a job on OPT?
Yes, you can travel while you are using OPT, and I would encourage you to work with your foreign student advisor on that issue. Recognize that when you travel, you are still F1. You still have to have an intention to return to your home country. The immigration officer can always question whether you have an intention to return to your home country. They will also question whether or not you're actually coming back in to complete a degree program. So what I usually recommend to students when you travel, when you are waiting for your OPT, well, you should never travel while you're waiting for your OPT. Technically, you can. I would not. If you want to travel using F1 after you graduate, you should wait until you have that optional practical training work card and a letter from an employer confirming that you will be employed upon your return. If you have that optional practical training work card and an employer letter confirming employment, that is going to be your best and safest option for traveling after graduation.
Okay, and this is a pretty specific question. I may refer the student to speak with you, but I'll go ahead and pose it. If my undergrad is in Chinese law, but currently pursuing a master's in government with the hope of doing government jobs in the future, will this be relevant as defined? And
Probably best to send that to me. I have no idea what that means.
that's their next question. I'm going to refer them to have you come speak to you directly. What if an employer says they don't have the infrastructure to sponsor H-1B? Is it true that companies are hesitant because it leads to federal scrutiny?
I mean, look, I've handled thousands of H-1Bs for small to mid-sized companies who had never done an H-1B ever before. They don't need a lot of infrastructure. I mean, I prepare all the paperwork. We give full advice on the process. So and I know many employers are skittish about the H-1B, but normally after I've had a very short conversation, employers go forward with it, having never done it ever before.
That's great. Mark is an amazing resource. Please make sure you have his contact information. And this is just a follow-up from our student that is married to a U.S. citizen, recognizing that it can take up to 2 years to process the green card, but there's still an opportunity to volunteer. Is there a way to get the green card quicker?
Well, a marriage-based green card typically does not take 2 years. Most
Okay.
of the time, it's much faster than that. But I mean, you can volunteer. It's always risky to volunteer without using because you're still F1 even while you're processing the green card. But that when you file a marriage-based green card, you will at the same time file to get a work card. That work card is typically issued within about 3 months of when you file. Sometimes it can take 6 months. But you will get that work card, and that'll allow you to work for anybody doing any job, volunteer or for pay.
Next question is, how can I find out more about e-visa eligible countries? Is there a difference between E1 and E2?
Yeah, you can Google e-visa treaty countries, and you will get a list of the countries that are eligible for e-visa. China, forget it. India, forget it. You're not on the list. But many countries are eligible for either E1, which is for trade between the United States and the home country, or E2, which is based on investing in a business in the United States.
Follow-up question from the same student. If I have a bachelor and a master's that are in slightly different fields, can I use either in justifying the job relatedness?
Yes. When you file an H-1B, you can rely on any degree that you have as long as the duties relate to the coursework you took during that particular degree program, either one.
Great. What happens if you don't find a job within the 60 days of the work card activation period for OPT?
Once you get an OPT work card, you actually have 90 days of unemployment time. So from the time that card becomes effective, you can be unemployed for a cumulative time of up to 90 days. If you have not found employment within that 90 days, you will lose your OPT and you'll have to depart the United States.
How realistic is it attempting to apply for the O visa?
Well, it's going to one O visas for individuals who have extraordinary ability in their particular field of expertise. That requires evidence of major prizes or awards, publications in academic journals, presentations at major conferences, citations to your work by other people, articles about you in major media. I do many, many, many O visas, so it's 100% dependent on what your qualifications are. Feel free to shoot me your CV. I'm happy to look at it, and I can tell you in about 5 minutes if I think you're going to qualify.
That's fantastic. Thank you again, Mark. We are so grateful for the resource you are for all of us. I would encourage you to not only reach out with your International Student Services offices on campus, but career advisors are here to help with this process too, and make sure we connect you to resources. I would also like to remind everybody this is the first session in our week of international career-related seminars tomorrow. I hope you can join us the same time slot where you are coming from across the country, but we're talking about networking culture in the United States with author Jeremy Schliffling. So thank you, everybody. This recording will be posted on the APSIA YouTube channel. Please let us know if you have any questions. Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
All right. Thank you all very much.
Have a great afternoon, everybody.